get started here on this session today, just know that while we're going to be talking about engagement and some factors or considerations that can help promote more engagement among our learners, there is not, unfortunately, a quick fix to solve some of the issues that we've experienced as we've transitioned to distance learning, and we've been looking, for ways to kind of bring in a higher percentage. I will share a number of strategies that I don't think are new to all of us. That would also be silly to think that everything we're talking about this evening is new to everybody, but some strategies and things we can keep in mind when we are looking to engage our learners. And I think you'll find that this session, welcome. I think that you'll find that this session is structured a little bit differently in the sense that, as listed in the description, this actually is not a tutorial on how to use technology at all. We will be talking about some technology tools later in the session, but first we're actually going to do a bit of an introduction or kind of critical analysis of what we mean by engagement. What is engagement? And that will frame our very quick exploration of a number of tools, remembering that the goal is never to use all the tools, but to be strategically selective about the precise tools that will meet the needs of your learners or the need that you have for data about your learners at any given time. So as we get later in this session and we start to look towards specific tools that might be useful in the sense of the degree to which they might engage our learners more actively in our instruction and in our learning experiences, do know that this session is not a tutorial on how to do that. We can't do that in an hour for a number of tools. And sadly, there is no one tool that's going to do this. So the resources that will be provided in the slide deck, most of the time actually take you to my support documents for the tools that we will talk about. But there are a few tools that are going to be mentioned later for which I don't have support documents. So in that case, I have linked you at least to their homepage so you can explore a little more. And much of the time, I have also provided a separate link to their help or getting started page to help you out. Okay, so we are going to get started. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this will work for all of us. There is a bit of participation involved in this session as well. So hopefully we'll be able to have a bit some conversations in a bit or at different times as we go through this content. So as I said, the focus today is on engaging our learners. Hold on one second, let me check the chat. There we go. Thank you. The graphics actually come from, so we know, a lot of us know about Google Slides. There are also slide templates. And so this slide template comes from, I think, a site called Presentation Go, and they give you templates for both PowerPoint as well as Google Slides. Another source I have gone to for some templates that are a different kind of template, actually, is Slides Carnival. Slides Carnival is more of a thematic approach to providing a whole series of different types of slides, all with one theme in terms of their look and their feel. The reason I used Presentation Go, I will check that for you later, but I think that's what this was called, is because it actually allows you to choose slide templates where for that particular slide, the template serves a specific purpose, whether you need a particular kind of graphic organizer. So you'll see a couple examples in this presentation, not tons, but this is one of them. So we're going to look, as I said today, at what is engagement. We will consider one framework much more in depth, but we will also look at a separate framework that's normally associated with differentiation. But as we look at it, we will see that there are definitely some implications and connections to the concept of engagement in general. So that one we will look at a little more briefly, but we will be looking at some frameworks to help guide us as we try to make instructional decisions about the design of our learning experiences and the kinds of opportunities that our learners will be able to participate in. We will then consider some tools. Again, very briefly, you'll get, in case the tools are new to you, I'll tell you a little bit about what each tool does, and you'll see how it's all linked to help resources so that you can make some decisions. And then finally, we will end with some resources. So let's get started. The first thing, like I said, that we want to do is actually consider the term engagement. So what I'd like to do is actually give you about 2 minutes to think about that term, and then just go into the chat for me, please, and type in what comes to mind for you when you're thinking, my learners show that they are engaged when, or this is what I think student engagement means. This is how I know my students are engaged, and so on. So about 2 minutes, please. So as we're starting to see the responses come in, I'm going to encourage you to look them over. Feel free to reply. I'm going to actually ask a couple of questions. I like the term engagement is when my students are invested in their learning. So Philip, if you're willing to, feel free to keep that going in the chat and tell me a little more about what you mean by invested. What does that look like for you? Engagement is when my students are completing the work, commenting on each other's work, and are asking questions. That's awesome. I really love that additional aspect of when they are so, almost as Philip said, right? When they're so invested in the work that they are asking questions in order to understand more deeply or go further or start to explore a nuance of it. That is really powerful. My learners show engagement when they participate in class by answering my checks for understanding and completing partner or small group assignments. Absolutely. And one of the things that's nice there is calling out that sense of it's not all just students in isolation, although we can see some engagement from individual students working on isolated activities. But Jennifer was also really calling out that what happens and the power that happens when students are engaged in group and collaborative group or partner projects and assignments. Asking questions. Oh, thank you, Philip, for following up on that. It means when he was talking about being invested, that the students care about their work. They see value in it, value in what they are learning, and they see its relevance. And then Billy added active participation, either verbally or typing while we are in the subject, either to me or commenting to other students in the class. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody's participation. And what I like about this is as we go through, and if you take a moment and kind of dig into that chat a little bit, just notice kind of what stands out for you, what kinds of aspects of engagement are called out, because we're going to look at a couple of other people's thoughts on engagement before we turn our attention to the frameworks that I said I would share. Okay. So let's take it to the next one here. So in one case, this was an interesting site. This edglossary.org is actually a site that's intended for use by families, community members, and journalists who find these words that we sometimes refer to as eduspeak. And so they take these eduspeak, these things that we talk about in education as if everybody understands us, and they try to define them so that it makes sense to people who are not in education. Again, whether that be family members, community members, or journalists who have to write about education topics. So on this edglossary.org, they define student engagement as the degree of attention, curiosity, interest, optimism, and passion that students show when they are learning or being taught, which extends to the level of motivation that they have to both learn and keep learning or progressing in their education. And then there's an article by ASCD, which is linked here. So remember, if you save this slide deck to your drive, you always have access to this. And it's also on the Technology Training and Support page in the Distance Learning Hub. This article by Richard Strong, Harvey Silver, and Amy Robinson, and I'm familiar with Richard Strong. I actually have a couple of his books. I'm not as familiar with his co-authors in this case, but in this article, they say that students who are engaged in their work are energized by 4 goals: success, curiosity, originality, and satisfying relationships. And I think that between those 2 things, we're seeing a lot of what you called out as in terms of, and really brought to the surface in terms of what engagement looks like for you. Taken together, these 2, they're not quite definitions, but these 2 statements really bring to the forefront the fact that the students show interest in kind of starting and maintaining and continuing their study of that topic or those concepts. They collaborate and they are interested in each other's work, that they are curious, and that they have this optimism or motivation. Oh, no problem. Thank you, Robin. Yes, participation. And I think that we see that here, you know, that sense of they're participating, they're involved, right? And they're deeply involved, and they're not, you know, the best examples of engagement are students who are participating almost by this intrinsic motivation to participate, that goes beyond compliance with just doing what the teacher said, because if I don't, I won't get the points or whatever that is. That's a piece of engagement, and that's at least a start. But when we really feel like students are engaged, it kind of feels like the momentum for learning on that particular topic or concept is self-propelling. One framework, and those of you who've been in any of my trainings in the last couple of weeks will notice that this keeps coming back because it has a lot of applicability across the things we are talking about. But one framework that some teachers might find helpful in terms of a way to kind of look at their learning experiences that they're designing and give it a lens as to the degree to which it will help learners begin that work, continue that work, remain engaged in that work, and so on, is the UDL, or Universal Design for Learning guidelines. And they are not about technology, but these guidelines can be a helpful model for engaging and sustaining all of our learners. And we will come back to this towards the end after we've talked about a couple more things and even some tools to kind of see what your thoughts are regarding the degree to which some of the tools we will talk about might help with these aspects of the guidelines. To what degree might some of the tools we talk about today help with recruiting interest? To what degree might they help students kind of keep going and persisting and keep on trying even when it gets hard? To what degree will the tools that we talk about help students, again, remain motivated, but also develop some coping skills and strategies that they can use and participate in self-assessment and reflection? In the middle column of representation, which although it doesn't say engagement, we'll see a lot of things here that help students be engaged in our learning experiences. So if students don't understand, for example, the vocabulary and symbols of the lesson, of the learning experience, they can't engage. They're going to immediately be shut off or cut off from that experience. So we want to be sure that we're providing multiple means of representation so that students can, in fact, take in the new information or content, begin to process it, begin to find a place in their brains for it to be organized so it can be retrieved later, begin to make connections between the new information and old information, as well as their own life experiences, and truly comprehend not only the words, but also the concepts of this new content. And then finally, for action and expression, which again doesn't say engagement, but the information presented here in this part of the guidelines will help our learners to be engaged in the ways that you had called out earlier in this session, because the students will have opportunities to have voice and choice in the media that they choose for how to demonstrate their knowledge, for example. That can make the task of demonstrating their knowledge much more engaging for them, and something that they are frankly more willing to engage in if they have some choice in how it is that they can demonstrate their knowledge. In addition, we will talk about, actually we'll only talk about this a tiny bit today, but it is an important consideration. At the very top one talks about not only the physical action, as in like physically manipulating or moving content or themselves in some way in order to both process learning and demonstrate learning, but also whenever possible, we do want to do the second bullet under physical action, which talks about optimizing access, so that students of all needs and all ranges of ability can access the content. Because again, if they can't even access the material, they cannot be engaged. And then finally, executive functions for goal setting, which kind of goes back to the reflection and self-regulation as well. There's a lot of overlap. And to what degree can our tools help with managing information and resources so they don't get lost and then become unable to engage in the ways that we'd like them to? So this is one framework. Again, it's not specific to technology. So we're going to shift a little bit. And again, also feel free at any point if you have questions to go ahead and put them in the chat for me. We will come back to this, but it will be a while before we see this again in the session. We're going to shift our attention now to a different framework that is specific to technology, and its purpose is to help us make decisions about, first of all, whether to use a particular technology tool, And then second of all, how it might best be used so that its use really does support the learning goals, the learning targets, or the learning objectives that we are trying to make progress towards with these learning experiences. So this tool is known as the Triple E framework. It was developed by an educator named Liz Kalb. She actually has the Triple E framework, but she also has a book called Learning First, Technology Second. So some of you might have heard of that. You might have colleagues in the district who are participating in the book study on that this semester, which is wrapping up, of course, but I will be offering the book study again in the summer. So the Triple E framework, as you might imagine, has 3 components as well, a lot like the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. It has 3 categories, each of which starts with an E. So it helps educators actually be able to almost quantify the impact of selected instructional technology tools, and really make some very sophisticated decisions and very informed decisions about why they think this tool is the best tool at this time for these learners and this task. The 3 categories are engagement, enhancement, and extension. And there's definitely some overlap and crossover between these 3 categories. So although the topic for our session tonight is called engagement, we will actually look a little bit at the other 2 categories as well, because kind of like what we saw with the Universal Design for Learning guidelines, there is some crossover and overlap and connection between the 3: engagement, enhancement, and extension. So one of the things that the author, Liz Kalb, tells us is, you know, teachers have noticed, and this was really evident back when we were in our face-to-face classrooms, that if you put some technology in front of students, or you give it to them, or they have technology, but you direct them to a particular technology tool, they become interested in the activity. And that often gets called engagement. The author, Liz Kalb, is going to challenge us to think about that engagement a little bit differently. Because there is a difference between the students being interested in the tool and the way it's designed and some of its features, and truly being engaged in learning and engaged in trying to go deeper and build their knowledge and engaged in showing their knowledge in meaningful ways. That's true. I like what, sorry about that, I closed it. I like what Shannon was saying about, well, it sure was the case in the classroom, but now they might not be so immediately engaged or interested by new technology anymore because they do it so much now. That's a good point. So the question becomes, if they are interested in the tool, does it automatically mean they are engaged in learning? And some of us, depending on your experiences and the kinds of things you've already tried in your classrooms, even before going to distance learning, might be able to see a distinction at times between where interest in a tool and being truly engaged in learning were not the same thing. One example I would give, even from my own practice in the classroom, were like my initial uses of tools like Kahoot, which is an online formative assessment tool. It's gamified, it's very competitive. It essentially puts up a multiple choice question, and the students see 4 response options on their phone or tablet or Chromebook, and they mark the response that they think is correct, and they try to earn points. One other feature of a tool like Kahoot is, in this case, you earn more points for responding more quickly if your response is correct. So it became much more important to just put in a response fast and move on to the next one. They were very interested in winning. Interestingly, much of the time, especially in my earliest uses of Kahoot, they weren't as interested in what the question was asking, why some students might have struggled to get it right, what difficulties or misconceptions or misunderstandings those wrong answers revealed about additional needs and learning that we had. And so I had to be very thoughtful about my approach to using Kahoot in the classroom, so that, yes, for students who were interested in winning, it was still fun for them, but there was a clear understanding that the purpose for which we are doing this is for learning. We will stop and discuss each question. We will actually, as a class, break down misconceptions that become evident when we see the different kinds of wrong answers that some students may have selected before we move on, and so on. Because initially they were interested in the tool and its bells and whistles and interested in winning, not necessarily engaged in learning. So in her framework, and I have taken this from her site, which you'll see is provided to you in her resources, the engagement part of the framework, that first E, is first on purpose. Because a little bit like what I was saying before with the UDL guidelines, if students aren't engaged, learning will not happen. There won't be learning if they're not engaged. So this is the first category of the framework, on purpose. And it is very clear in her framework, just for your consideration, that the engagement actually isn't about the bells and whistles, even though those are nice and even though those do motivate some learners. And engagement isn't focused primarily on winning. Again, even though that is a factor that can be motivating to some learners to participate. It motivates them to participate, but it may not motivate them to better understand the topic that the questions were about, or to try harder, for example. And some of the ways we can see that happen, for example, when someone was on the leaderboard and then maybe they drop off a bit and they don't come back to, like, they keep trying for a while, but then they might just stop participating if it becomes evident that there's no way to get back up on that leaderboard. That tells us this wasn't about the learning, it was about the bells and whistles and winning, right? That gives us that example of that difference that we sometimes see between interest and true engagement in the learning, in the goals, in the objectives, in the learning target. So what we are looking for are tools that not only have bells and whistles for students who need them, or tools that may or may not have a competitive component. We're going to be looking for tools that focus learners so that they develop a more sophisticated understanding of the content. So tools that help them focus, help them really go deeper into the content with less distraction and with success. We want a tool to motivate our learners to start learning to begin with, but we also want it to motivate them to continue learning. And we want a tool, ideally, we want tools as often as possible to shift learners from being passive consumers of content where they take it in, even if they're interested in it and they take it in. We want them to be active producers of content and material and responses in a way that Liz Kalb calls co-constructed or co-use. This is almost more important now that we are in a distance learning situation, and in some ways there are pieces of it that are a little bit harder because we don't have the students in our classroom with us. Because co-use, one of the big factors, and we don't have necessarily time tonight to go super deeply into her framework, but one of the factors of co-use is that we are learning as technology becomes more ubiquitous and as instructional technology becomes more and more commonly used and new tools are developed that teachers can leverage with their students, that the risk becomes students spending more and more and more time learning in isolation in front of their one device by themselves. And when we lose that social component of learning, for many learners, they won't learn as deeply or go as far or understand as well. So we're going to look for tools that help students co-use technology in order to together deepen their understanding, as well as actively produce content that demonstrates the depth of their understanding. So I'm going to pause for just a moment to give you a chance to put in the chat if you have any questions before I go to the next E, or if you have any comments you would like to make, or connections that you have as we've talked about this, any connections, or if you would like to hop on the microphone. We have a pretty small group, so feel free to do that as well. Let me head into the chat. Oh, nice. Tricks for getting students who want to hide and not participate to do so. I actually hope we will be able to come back to that question and just see. And I actually also welcome all of you jumping in on that question in the chat in terms of what has worked for you. We have some expertise here in the room, right? You all have experience working with various learners, helping them kind of come into this learning and engage in it. And so what works for one teacher may or may not work for someone else. And so we can all learn by seeing what others are doing in that regard. Sometimes for me, one of the pieces that can sometimes help a student who is having difficulty bringing themselves to participate in the learning comes to a couple of factors. So excuse me while I really quickly backtrack through here. I want to make sure, first of all, that I have done everything that I can to make sure that the students are set up for success. And I think all of us do that. But I learned as I grew and continued to grow, because it would never stopped in my teaching, that I would continually understand more deeply the different ways in which I could try to provide supports to learners, so that learners who approach things in different ways would be more likely to feel like they can participate comfortably. So some of that comes from things such as the ones listed here in the UDL guidelines by, for example, giving students voice and choice. So whenever it's appropriate to do so, I would try to give my learners different ways of participating. And I admit it wasn't always possible for me to figure out a different way. I was a language teacher for 25 years. If I need the kids to speak, I need them to speak, right? That's a big part of language. But I would try to, put in some allowances so that, for example, when we were in the classroom, I might accept a presentational speaking in a number of different ways, which is speaking for an audience. That might not all include standing up in front of the class. I don't have to have it be that way in order to know for sure whether my students can engage in a presentational speaking task. So I would start to look more and more at, were there ways that I could ensure that students felt that they had what they needed in order to participate? Because it becomes so hard as a teacher to not think that the students are just not willing, or that they're lazy or whatever. And it's hard not to think that, especially when sometimes it seems like nothing's reaching them. But many times I have to bring myself back to some of the articles I've read and so on, where people have laid out some data showing that a lot of the time it's actually comes down to, even if it looks like defiance and it presents itself as defiance or like defiant non-participation, it comes down to students being so unsure that they understand what they're doing that they're not willing to try. And they'd rather take the F sometimes than risk making a mistake. So what kinds of supports and things can I put in place so that, first of all, somehow they start to get more comfortable with the idea that it's going to be okay. Mistakes happen to all of us. We all make them. You actually might make one too, and it will be okay. But also, what can I put in place so that, before you have to say anything out loud to the group, say anything even in a small group, there have been other tasks and supports put in place so that you've had a chance to formulate your thoughts, get them organized, and figure out how it is you'll be able to contribute or participate. And that doesn't just go for speaking, but also for other tasks as well. That was one thing that helped me. And it kind of connected to this sense of making sure that they were focused and had the understanding they needed, and that they knew they had the understanding and the tools they needed. I sometimes had to remind students where to go to get help, where to go to review the helpful pieces that might sustain their success and their participation so that they could be motivated. So that's just one thing, and I don't know if others might have shared something. Thank you. All right, so let's look at the second E. The second E in her framework is enhancement. And although it's not called engagement, I think we'll see some connections here in terms of that sense of providing the kinds of experiences where learners will be able to engage in the ways that you had described at the beginning of our work today. So when she talks about enhancement, she's looking for ways that we as educators can use tools that aid students in developing or demonstrating a more sophisticated understanding of content, which we saw, again, remember there's overlap and connection. We saw that in engagement as well. through promoting creation or production over simple consumption, which we also saw on the engagement page. So there's, again, that overlap and connection. We know that if learners hear information, they'll capture some of it maybe. We know that if they read it, they'll capture some of it maybe. We know that if we do both, they'll capture more. We know that if they read and hear it and have visual support, they'll capture even more. But in order for them to own that information and set it in their brain in a way where they can recall it and use it as needed later, they have to do something with it. So we only get a little bit of the way there, even when we do activities and experiences that combine audio support with visual support, with textual support. That gets us almost there, but until they have to actually take that information and synthesize it and do something with it, they don't know if they understand it. We don't know if they understand it. So we're looking, if we're going to use a technology tool, we want to use one that does provide all of that support for the input, while also looking at a tool that will help them synthesize that, break it down, create their own little chunks and schema for understanding it, and then do something with that information so that they can see the degree to which they're understanding it, and so can we. We also would like to see technology tools that give students scaffolds to make it easier to understand concepts or ideas, and that can happen in a number of ways. That can be as simple as teachers building in their own scaffolds by taking a complex topic when they design a new lesson that they're going to record, for example, and post in their classes, breaking it into much smaller chunks, making sure that chunk has the audio and visual support, models and examples, checks for understanding, and so on before going on to the next product. We also know that we can build in scaffolds by explicitly linking new concepts to some foundational skill they had already learned previously, either in our class or in a previous year. Those can help build scaffolds. We can have scaffolds that adjust for students' language comprehension. So we want to try to have tools in place that will provide every learner with access to this information. And some of the tools we'll talk about today have some built-in leveling. For example, hi, I forgot to check the participant list. So just in case you are someone new rather than someone whose internet stopped and that you came back in, I'll go ahead and put the support document in the chat. You might have, sometimes we have people accidentally get kicked out and come back in, but just in case. And then the other piece of enhancement is that we hope that a technology tool that we go ahead and take the time and invest in using, right? And it is an investment. We have to learn how to use it. We have to figure out its in and outs. Then we have to figure out how to get the kids to know how to use it so that they can be successful. And then once they've used it, we still have to go back and figure out where their work is, right? And how, and just determine how we can view their work. Does it have a built-in feedback tool? Do we have to provide feedback in a separate location? Like there's a lot to it. So using a new technology tool is a big investment of time on our part, and it can be also on the student's part. So we want to be sure that the tools that we pick create a path for students to demonstrate their understanding of the learning goals, but we want to be so strategic and selective that we know we selected this particular tool because the path it creates to demonstrating the learning goal wouldn't have been possible without some feature that this tool has. Otherwise, we can just use something else that the kids already know. Or when we're back in the classroom, we can just use paper and pencil. It's okay. If the tool isn't giving us any more than what paper and pencil gives us, once we're in our classrooms, then we're probably going to think more carefully about whether or not we need to use it. In our current setting, and the setting in which we will probably start the school year with at least some distance learning, then we just want to be thoughtful about, tool overload, both for teachers and students, so that we're being, again, very strategic and selective about why we are using this tool now instead of a tool that all of us already know. And we can also not only be strategic and selective, but transparent. Tell the students what this tool is offering that we couldn't accomplish with Google Docs, right? Or that we couldn't accomplish with the question feature in Google Classroom, or with a Google form, and we're going to use this other one. So we want to really be thoughtful about that. You're welcome. And then the third E is extension. And extension really is talking about taking everything we've already done, but making sure that the learning experiences that result have connections to the world beyond their school day and beyond their classroom. Now, to a certain extent, we broke down that wall a while ago, right? But even so, just because they're learning at home doesn't really mean we've taken the learning out of the classroom, unless the tasks that they are engaging in reflect something more than an academic task that we only do in classroom settings, if that makes sense. So we're going to look for ways that use tools that create opportunities for students to extend their learning not only outside of their typical school day, which currently again has no meaning right now for them. Any time is learning time for them, which is kind of nice in a way. They don't associate learning with a particular moment of the day anymore. But that also creates a bridge between their school learning and everyday life experiences, so that there is a purpose for the work they are doing that is beyond being able to check off that it was done or providing a grade. It's more than just an academic task. It's a task that has relevance to people outside of classrooms. It's the kind of work that sometimes people will say like real people do with this same skill, this same concept, or this same knowledge. And that happens by making sure that the tasks that we have them do and the learning in which we engage them for new lessons is contextualized or situated in authentic contexts that, again, are not just academic in nature, but authentic contexts for how this same knowledge or these same skills are used beyond the classroom. And we hope that by doing that, students will build skills that they can use in their everyday lives, in addition to skills that will help them be successful in an academic sense for the purposes of our class and the reporting of how well they did in our class. Okay. So we are going to need to think about that, and that is a lot to think about. So let me just kind of bring us back and give us a chance to look again, because we're going to start talking about tools pretty quickly, because as I said, unfortunately, this is not a training on how to use any specific tools. We're going to just consider a number of different types of tools to help us through this process, so that we have a list of tools at our disposal to start with, so that we can look at each one of those and be selective about why we might use it. So we know that we have, to start with, 2 frameworks, and there are many more that we can use to help us design these learning experiences and determine how students might have opportunities to both learn and then demonstrate their knowledge. One being the UDL guidelines, and the other being this Triple E framework of engagement, enhancement, and extension. So focusing learners, motivating them, helping them co-use technology so that they're not just learning in isolation in front of their computers, which is almost more of a concern now than it even was when we were in our classrooms. Enhancement, so that they have the scaffolds they need, they have multiple ways to represent their knowledge, their understanding gets deeper, and the work that they're doing has connections to the world beyond our classrooms and beyond textbooks and beyond online instructional materials and so on. So, as you might have guessed, no matter how many fabulous tools we might talk about, the degree to which these tools will support learner engagement very much depends on exactly what it is the students are going to be doing with this tool. The magic is never in the technology. It's always in the task and the design of that task by the educator. So that's why, even though you might hear us talk about a whole bunch of tools today, this isn't Pokemon. You don't got to use them all. And in fact, you shouldn't. You really want to be strategic about the tool that will be the most useful for these learners at this time and in this place. And I think we all understand that, almost especially now, as we've seen some technology fatigue. So as I alluded to a moment ago, what really comes first is learning and the tasks associated with the learning, and then the tool. It's never the magic. The technology itself isn't that magical, it turns out. It's only what we leverage it for and how we use it that brings in the magic. So we want tools that allow students to be heard and seen, we're kind of seeing some students respond better now. You know, Shannon mentioned earlier, we have some students who are, they've already felt invisible in our learning, and they managed to fade away to complete invisibility now that we've gone to distance learning, and we're trying to bring them back in. But we also have some students who always found it difficult to ask questions, difficult to share their ideas, and some of those students are doing better because they're more comfortable doing it in these kinds of digital spaces. So what we're trying to do then is, how can we have some tools that make all students feel comfortable enough to allow themselves, their voices, their perspectives, their experiences, and their knowledge, and even sometimes their misunderstandings, be seen and heard? How can we provide learners through technology? How can we use technology to provide learners with new opportunities to build knowledge? Oh, I did that twice. I'm gonna have to fix that. Share new knowledge. Share new knowledge. That's what I love about Google. We can, you know, do that. Share new knowledge and understanding and skills in authentic ways. And are there ways that we can be sure that students are creating with technology and creating with content and creating with knowledge, but not always in isolation, through collaboration and co-use of technology, which is people using technology together for a common purpose. It doesn't have to be just students, although that's the most common right now. We can actually have, and you've seen some of this, families are now co-using technology, sometimes by necessity. Students aren't able to navigate the interface because they're too young and inexperienced, or because they have other needs. And so the families are now co-using technology together instead of leaving students to their own devices, both literally and figuratively, and so on. So we want to find more and more ways to do that. So we're going to start with some tools that you may already be familiar with because they're part of what we use every day, and other tools that were designed to go directly with this G Suite, or Google for Education. In Google Classroom, I will say, actually, I could add another feature here. One of the best features that can help with engagement that's built into Google Classroom is the Ask a Question feature. It's a type of assignment. And what happens is you ask a question, it defaults to short answer. It does have a multiple choice version, but I find most people like this best, especially for engagement purposes, with short answer. And then depending on if the teacher sets it up this way, because as the teacher, you get to decide, students can see each other's responses and reply to each other's responses. So that can really help bring their voices into the room. They all have something to say. They already have a voice. So we aren't giving students voice. You know, some you'll say we need to, you know, ensure we give student voice. They have a voice. The question is, can we bring that voice out? Can we make it comfortable for them to feel like it's okay to be heard and seen? So the Ask a Question feature is already built into Google Classroom. And the thing I would add to this that isn't listed here actually is thinking about whether or not we would be okay with allowing our students to post in the stream. They can't post in classwork. Don't worry about that. Your students can never create assignments for everybody else or anything like that. But you do have a default setting in Google Classroom that many teachers turn off, and I'll explain why. But the default when the classes are created is that students can comment to whatever you post or anyone else posts in the stream, which is that front page that looks a little bit like the social media page. It's just a feed of everything you've ever posted. And they can also post things themselves. Now, I was a high school teacher. I also taught French for most of my career. So I had a group of students who by and large had chosen to be in my class, right? And I did leave the post on, even though they were high school, even though every year I taught sophomores who don't always make the best decisions about what to do. But I chose to go ahead and try leaving their ability to post and comment in the stream on, with the understanding that, number one, I am super excited if you actually found something you think the rest of the class can benefit from and you care enough to share it with the class. I call that a win. I want you to share that with the class. If you post something inappropriate, there is a problem here. Google Classroom does not give you the ability to moderate it first. It is immediately visible, but it is also associated with their name. So you know who did it. You'll have evidence because it'll be right there. You can mute that student and work with that student individually on digital citizenship and what might have to happen before they have access to that privilege again. while others who are ready for that level of engagement and that level of access can continue using the post and comment in the stream. So I actually really liked it and I left it on. And once I was thrilled when students would pop in with extra resources or some kind of content or video that was related to what we were learning that they had just found on their own and wanted to share. You do need to know that the Ask a Question feature, students cannot reply to each other until they first have replied themselves, and they cannot see each other's posts or reply to them, even if you tell it in the Ask a Question editing page that they can, unless you have let them post and comment in the stream. So that overrides everything. If they can't post and comment in the stream, they can never see each other's responses to the questions and they cannot reply to them. Unfortunately, the Ask a Question feature does not include any variation really for like how they can format their text or anything like that. Google Classroom is very limited in that sense. You actually have to attach links to support the text because you can add recorded audio, you can add a Google Drive file or an image, but each thing's going to come in as a separate link. In Google also, we know that we can have students use Google Docs in a collaborative way. We know that they can use Google Slides in a collaborative way, and they can even use Google Drawings in a collaborative way, and creative ways. So they can use those tools to do what we talked about earlier in terms of creating content that demonstrates their understanding of the new material, the connections they see between concepts, and so on. And the reason there's links, by the way, these are links to my support documents, but I will gladly help you with anything. If I don't have a support document linked, Google actually is pretty good at helping us find resources and support for these other ones. Google Forms can have some really interesting uses that can help students maintain their motivation to learn, for example, which was one of the factors of engagement. And also strategically provide scaffolds to students who are struggling. So it would be a question of exploring the many kinds of questions and content that can be included in a Google form. And then as you get comfortable with how to build Google Forms, going further and using the feedback tools in the Google quiz feature to kind of provide support when learners get an incorrect answer, and also support when they have a correct answer. Like, they got this question right, what new avenue are they now ready for that we can give to them? But also a more advanced feature called sections, which is basically question logic that you can use in the design of instruction, where you might have recorded a new lesson in Screencastify. You could put that lesson in a Google form, but first they will answer a preliminary question that decides if they're ready for the lesson. And if they get it right, it'll take them to the lesson and the follow-up questions on the lesson. If they struggle with that preliminary question, it will take them to support material based on the type of struggle they had or the wrong answer they had. And once they do that better, it will loop them to the lesson. So they will get the lesson when they are ready for it. This can provide motivation, necessary supports and scaffolds, just like we were talking about with engagement, so that students can build the success that they'll need in order to participate and engage. Pear Deck is an add-on to Google Slides. It actually includes interactive slides. So when you present your Pear Deck presentation, students can actually answer questions right on their own device that get pushed to them when you give them the presentation. And they can answer in a number of ways: typing, dragging something, clicking on a multiple choice, or even drawing. It is freemium, so you can sign up for a 90-day free trial, and then it's licensed. And unfortunately, at this time, we do not have the capacity to purchase licenses for the whole district. But I just want to be clear with you on that it is not completely free. But you could try it for free for a while to get all the features. And then if you don't purchase it, you just only have access to the templates that are available in the free version. A couple of new things they've added to Pear Deck: social emotional learning templates, which we anticipate being an even greater need next year as students return back from this oddly interrupted semester of learning. And so there are some social emotional template slides where you can help them kind of examine their feelings and learn to deal with them and learn to express them. And so on. Plus, there are built-in features now for teachers to really easily add audio to their Google Slides. It's even easier than Screencastify. and also to provide individual feedback that just got released yesterday or today. So it used to be you could see each student's work in Pear Deck, but you couldn't give them feedback through Pear Deck. Now you can. Cami, some of you have used. It's a Chrome extension that allows your users to type, draw, highlight, and comment on PDF documents. It also provides supports. Remember, we talked about we want technology tools that'll help motivate students to start learning and maintain their learning, and tools that provide scaffolds. Cami has a built-in dictionary so that students can click on a word and get a definition. Unfortunately, like Jennifer, it's only in English, so it doesn't work for world languages, but it does work for the other subject areas. Cami also has a screen reader. Again, in English, it has a screen reader function where it will read text aloud from on the Cami page for the learner, so that if they need that audio support, they can have it. It also, because of the nature of how the tool works, when teachers design a Cami activity, teachers can provide additional audio support, video support, screen captured tutorial support built right into Cami, so that we're providing those scaffolds and things for learners. And I would say I've done a couple trainings on differentiation in Google Classroom. So if you're also looking at more ways to provide scaffolds, you might go into the Distance Learning Hub on the Technology Training and Support page and check out the recording or the support document for differentiating in Google Classroom, because we'll talk that those supports are part of how we help learners engage in the content. And then Screencastify allows you to either have audio or video. You can choose to just extract the audio from your recordings so that you can provide learners with video support, not just for lessons, but you can even do quick tutorials of how it is they're supposed to interact with a tool. Like if they're new to using Cami or new to using Pear Deck, you can go into that tool, use Screencastify to show how they will use the features in order to complete the assignment, and then include that video with their assignment in Google Classroom so that they are supported to continue. Screencastify Submit helps with engagement in giving learners an option. We want to give them options for how they might demonstrate their learning. It is a very easy, very simple, like remember I said the magic is never in the tool, recorder, where the students don't even need Screencastify and they don't need accounts. You create the assignment called Screencastify Submit, you give them the link to assignment, and it gives them a record button. And that way they will submit to you a recording if that's the option they choose or if that's the option you're making available. As we extend beyond kind of our base set of G Suite tools, and even a couple of extras that not everybody is necessarily using, and nor does everybody have to, we're going to look at some third-party tools that might help with some of the things we've been talking about in terms of engagement. And remember, all of these links either take you directly to a support document with a link to a recorded training, links to how-to pages, often there's screenshots of what it should look like when you're doing it, and so on. Edgy is a collaborative threaded reading annotation tool. It helps in a couple of ways. One of the things it does, we were talking about engagement in terms of providing multiple ways for students to demonstrate their understanding. When teachers create an activity with Edgy, they decide in what ways can students provide their responses, ranging from voice recording to text to emoji, or a combination of the three. There are even some examples online of some powerful ways to use the emoji response tool with the readings that you put into Edgy. There is a not a data bank, but there is a lesson bank of publicly available lessons across several subject areas that teachers have made available in Edgy, if you would like to look at that. And then any reading that you have your learners doing, you can type it into Edgy, you can copy and paste it into Edgy, or you can upload it as a PDF. And the really cool thing is it also helps you see what features of a text your students are noticing, because you will get a heat map of what they've annotated, and the things that are deeper red or orange in color are the things that more students have annotated, and things that are pale yellow are the things that only 1 or 2 students have commented on. And it's collaborative and threaded, because if you set it up this way, again, it's your decision when you create the activity, students can read it once on their own and make annotations. You have to provide the instructions. Remember, the magic comes from you. It does not automatically make reading engagement more visible or better. It's all about how you set it up and what the instructions are. But they do the annotations you've asked them to do. Then you flip a switch in Edgy and you give it back to the students to do again, but now they're going to be able to see all the annotations that all the students did. They'll see the heat map as well, and they can reply to each other if you give them permission to do so. So now they're having ongoing conversations about the content of this reading. They are co-using technology. There's some scaffolds built in the sense that you kind of directed them to how to engage and interact with the reading successfully, and they're learning from each other's interpretations and so on. So it can be powerful. Edpuzzle can help you build in scaffolds because you can take any video from a number of sources, including YouTube, and add questions that appear throughout so that the video stops playing and they actually have a moment to process and answer questions before it resumes. Plus, you can add your own audio notes or typed notes that will appear on the right. It will pause the video and they have to play the audio note before the video will continue, or they have to read the note and then click play to continue the video. So you can add some support for what they already saw or what they're about to see in order to help them be successful. ListenWise is an interesting tool. What it does is it takes radio reports from public radio stations and it has them leveled. It has them aligned by subject area, some of the standards, and then it has built-in kind of question activities and so on. So it's really leveraging what we talked about with engagement in terms of authenticity, real-life experiences, because it takes concepts in science and finds actual radio reports where those concepts were being discussed so that students can actually see this knowledge being put to use in a setting outside of the classroom and interact with that and answer questions. And it's also leveled. It is freemium. Well, actually, it's a free trial. It's not even freemium. You really have to just, you can try premium for free. That's right. It is freemium. But if you do have the paid version, one of the things it will allow you to have as a scaffold is a slowed down version of the article, of the radio report rather. Many of you know about Newsy.LA, but it's searchable current events database. It actually has some reading, some video, some audio. There are activities, quizzes, and students can leave annotations. And so I linked you to their Getting Started page. If you have a pro version, you can also do leveled readings so that you can build in that scaffold where every learner is reading the same content and they're actually mainly reading it from the same source, but they're accessing that reading at their appropriate level of challenge. Many of you have seen Padlet. It's a board where students can post. It almost looks like a blank bulletin board when it starts, and then students can start filling it in with their own responses. And what's nice about Padlet is that they can respond in a number of ways. So this goes back to some of our engagement, and it's all about the task because it is a blank. You have to put the prompt at the top to decide what you want them to do and how. But once you've done that, they can type, they can audio record, video record, draw, do a screen capture recording, share a link, and more. And if you want them to, they can vote on each other's responses, they can like each other's responses, or they can comment on each other's responses. You can also set it up so that it's moderated so that you see the posts first before they're visible, and a lot of other features. It is freemium. You get 3 boards for free, then you have to pay, but the 3 boards are fully featured. So all of those options for responding are available. You also set it up the way you want, and they keep adding to this. There's more and more and more layouts for how you would like the new posts to appear or to be organized that the students make. I think a lot of us have started hearing more and more about Flipgrid. This is a totally free tool. It is basically where students have threaded video conversations. So you set up first a grid. Under the grid, you set up a topic. You give the topic to your students, and they can actually respond via video from a phone, from a tablet, from a Chromebook, or from a computer, as long as there's a webcam with microphone. You decide if anybody else can ever see their responses and whether you want people to be able to reply to the responses, but you can use that to engage them in a video conversation about the topic that you're learning. You can just leave it only visible to your class, and your class can look at each other's videos. You can collaborate with another teacher of the same grade or subject and have your classes collaboratively talking about a topic and sharing their thinking. You can reply in a way that's visible to all learners, or you can send an individual comment typed or video to any student. You can associate a rubric with an activity. So there's a lot of ways that you can use it. And online, there are so many different kinds of activities people are doing with Flipgrid. Seesaw is a digital portfolio tool. We are over time, so I'm going to wrap this up, but Seesaw is a digital portfolio tool where students can type, share a link, share a photo, audio record over the photo, draw on the photo, or make a video. And you can have it all organized by folders within Seesaw. So a lot of early elementary teachers are using this instead of Google Classroom. And a lot of us as world language teachers had been using it because it was a really easy way to capture student speaking, push out activities. It's very easy to use. Adobe Spark, all your students already have it for free, so do you. You can create either a kind of single page post or flyer. So can your students. You can create a video that combines text, audio recording, music, video, images, or you or your students can make a single page website to synthesize all the information about a concept. They even have a cool infographic kind of template, which my support document there will give you a link to. We were talking about co-use. So Peer Grade is something I used in the classroom. It would actually randomly distribute student work to each other. And I set up questions in advance for students to consider in giving each other feedback. And then if I wanted to, I could set up 2 rounds of feedback where they would get feedback from 2 peers and so on. So I would look into that. And we won't have time to do what I was hoping to do here, unfortunately, but I wanted to remind you of the EEE framework and have you think about tools that you already use or tools we talked about and how they might be aligned with the EEE framework. You might be thinking of some of those answers right now, but just in case this is only my own thinking, I am no more an expert than you, but the tools we talked about today, there's a lot of overlap, remember, and a lot of connections. So depending on the task, these tools might be useful for what engagement means, for what enhancement means, and for what extension means, right? Because there is a lot of overlap. And again, the magic is in how it is used, not in the tool itself. Similarly, for the UDL guidelines, I was very ambitious. I was hoping we would get to do this. What do you think about the tools we were discussing, tools you're already using, tools I never mentioned, but that you love, in terms of the degree to which they support what the UDL guidelines call out in order to make sure that every learner can become an expert learner in these 3, by harnessing these 3 areas. And again, there's tons of overlap, right? Depending on the use or the task, Kami could support engagement and or representation and or action expression, right? And that happens for a lot of these tools. So interestingly, the point keeps coming back to, it really depends on how the tools are being organized. So I talk a little bit about those online formative assessment tools that I think I love them. A lot of people love them. I tell you a little bit about several, but not even all of them because people keep inventing more. And then at the end here, the second to last slide, there's a lesson planning tool that's aligned to the EEE framework. Please don't do this with every lesson. You won't like me anymore. You won't even like lesson planning anymore. Be strategic about when you want to go that deeply, but it can be a nice tool to look at in terms of helping us remember the various aspects of how technology can truly promote engagement with learning. Okay, so it is just a Word template. You could put it down in Word and then put it up in put it back up into Google Docs if you're like me and you prefer having it all in Google Docs, and so on. If you just want a simple version of the EEE framework to evaluate a tech tool you're considering, I gave you a link to that. I also sent you directly to her website if you're interested in that. I've given you a clickable version of the UDL guidelines, so every one of those little sub-elements actually expands out to give you more information and resources. And I gave you links to 2 matrices, a formative assessment tools matrix, and a matrix of practice and assessment tools that are typically more open-ended than those quick checks for understanding. These matrices actually give you kind of a way to check at a glance for the features you want and are looking for in a tool. And the second column on the left gives you how-to resources. The last column on the right gives you some notes from my own experience or exploration of the tools. And the there's a very similar one for practice tools like Adobe Spark and more open-ended things like Padlet and Adobe Spark and so on. So again, this formative assessment tools matrix, sorry, it keeps scrolling. The formative assessment tools matrix is mostly focused on those tools that are kind of quick checks for understanding, primarily through multiple choice questions used in a variety of ways. And the practice activities matrix also could be used for assessment, and they tend to be more open-ended. And then I will have a live recorded version of this in here soon because we recorded it tonight, so that will be here. And that's it. So our book study will be in PL. It's not there yet, but it will be. So if you're interested in the framework and diving more deeply into it, we will have the book study Learning First, Technology Second available. Whew. All right, have a wonderful evening and a super amazing weekend. Please take some time this weekend. You've been working incredibly hard. So do not spend the weekend going back over this, please. Okay, have a good one, everybody.